When the HOA claimed my home's cheerful color was a menace to community harmony, I decided to obey, precisely, technically, and spitefully, until their own rulebook became their worst nightmare. Before starting from beginning, please subscribe for more. The incident began on a Sunday morning, so ordinary it could have been photocopied from any other day in the neighborhood. The street was quiet, the air crisp, and my freshly painted house gleamed in a bright, sunny yellow that made the cul-de-sac look a little less like a row of identically printed catalog homes. I had chosen the color intentionally, warm enough to feel inviting, gentle enough to avoid blinding motorists, and, most importantly, approved by the list of allowable shades filed in the HOA's digital handbook. It was cheerful, yes, but well within the spectrum. Yet cheerfulness, apparently, was its own offense. The letter arrived folded neatly, slipped into an envelope so aggressively beige that it screamed administrative irritation. It came stamped with the HOA's emblem, a tree that somehow managed to look disapproving. The message inside delivered its verdict with the practiced passive aggression of people who believed their lawn badges gave them power. According to the board, my house, though technically compliant, presented an overly vibrant presentation that disrupts the neutral aesthetic goals of the community. There was something impressive about how they managed to both admit I followed the rules and still accuse me of wrongdoing. The letter ended with a directive: repaint the house in a more neutral tone within 30 days to preserve visual cohesion and neighborhood decorum. My options, they said, fell within their classic palette of muted colors curated for timelessness. The word timeless in HOA language translated roughly to visually safety-pinned to the concept of dry toast. That evening, I stood across the street, arms crossed, observing the house that had suddenly become a problem. The yellow glowed under the setting sun, looking harmless, pleasant, and quite possibly the happiest house in all of suburbia. It was absurd to think it could threaten anything other than a few bored residents' need for control. Still, I knew what game they were playing. They didn't want compliance. They wanted conformity. The board thrived on the predictable, the dull, the utterly unremarkable. Anything that deviated from the neighborhood's visual monotony was treated like an invasive species. I could fight them, appeal the decision, attend their meeting armed with printouts and highlighted PDFs. But I understood something powerful about HOAs. Nothing infuriated them like being obeyed exactly. And so my plan formed, steady and deliberate. I combed through their list of approved neutrals, which read like a museum exhibit of colors that had given up on life. But among them was a shade so bland, so lifeless, so hilariously devoid of personality that it made all the other neutrals look vibrant by comparison. Its name was something painfully generic, a combination of words that suggested a paint company had run out of creativity and simply shrugged. This color would comply with every rule. It would satisfy every requirement, and it would make my house look like a monument to beige sorrow. I imagined the faces of the board members, their forced smiles twitching as they realized they had unintentionally allowed this disaster into their community guidelines. The thought carried a level of satisfaction so pure, it felt almost meditative. The next week was spent preparing. I bought the required gallons of paint, I hired a painter willing to follow my instructions to the letter, and I waited, watching the HOA members drive past my home during their daily patrols, their eyes narrowing at the sunny brightness they so resented. If they wanted neutral, I would give them neutral in the most literal interpretation possible. Every inch of siding, every trim edge, every decorative accent would be swallowed by the drabbest shade imaginable. As the 30-day deadline approached, I arranged for the repainting to begin on the final weekend, ensuring maximum visibility. When the work began, passers-by slowed their cars, confused, maybe unsettled, as the cheerful yellow disappeared beneath the oppressive, muddy neutrality. By the end of the day, the transformation was undeniable. My house no longer radiated warmth or personality. It stood there like a surrendered soldier, cloaked in a color that whispered, "I am here, technically." And the best part was knowing this was only the beginning. The HOA wanted neutral, and now they would have to live with the consequences. The morning after the repainting, the neighborhood woke to an eyesore so dreary it seemed to drain the sunlight from the air. The new color, though impeccably compliant, possessed the remarkable ability to make everything around it look more depressing. Even the trees appeared paler when framed beside it. The house stood like an abandoned cardboard factory, a structure so aggressively dull that it challenged the concept of sight itself. Residents ventured outside one by one, each pausing mid-walk as they turned toward my home and tried to mask their reactions behind polite suburban half-smiles. I watched from my window, documenting the parade of confusion, concern, and in some cases, horror. It was a piece of performance art without saying a word. Soon enough, the HOA began receiving complaints, not about my original cheerful yellow, but about the new color. The complaint descriptions were unintentionally poetic. Neighbors described the house as visibly draining, emotionally deflating, and an aesthetic vacuum. One comment accused the color of sucking the joy out of the cul-de-sac like a beige black hole. Another called it the color equivalent of an expired saltine. The irony was delicious. Yet for all the complaints, the board could do nothing. My new shade fell squarely within the approved list. The HOA had written the rules. I had simply followed them with devotion bordering on parody. The board, however, hated being cornered, especially by their own regulations. Within days, the board president, a man who wore short-sleeved dress shirts like a uniform of authority, began patrolling the street more frequently. He drove slower, stared harder, and fidgeted with a clipboard that likely held nothing but scribbled irritations. Each pass of his car felt like a silent battle of wills, though technically nothing could be done. Neighbors whispered amongst themselves. Some were angry with the board for forcing the repainting at all. Others were angry with me, though privately many admitted the revenge was warranted. A few even confessed to being impressed, noting that the HOA had finally met its match. Throughout the chaos, the house continued to stand in its dreadful glory, a beacon of bureaucratic spite. The situation escalated when local kids began using my house as a landmark for directions. Instead of "turn left at the Johnson's place," it became "turn right at the sad brownish/gray house that looks like it gave up." Even delivery drivers noted it in package drop-off instructions. The HOA hated unofficial labels more than anything, and every mention of the house's depressing color felt like an insult to their supposed standards. By week 2, the board called an emergency meeting. They insisted it was to address multiple ongoing community concerns, but everyone knew what the real agenda item was. I didn't attend. I wasn't obligated to. Instead, I sat on my porch, sipping iced tea, listening to the distant murmur of dissatisfied homeowners trapped in a room with a rule book they no longer fully trusted. When the meeting finally ended, board members dispersed with the collective expression of people who had lost a chess game to a pigeon. They had hoped, perhaps, to pass some fast-tracked amendment banning the color, but such rules would require votes, signatures, and processes designed to prevent exactly this kind of impulsive policymaking. In the following days, subtle attempts at pressure began. Friendly but firm letters appeared at my door, encouraging me to consider repainting again to support community harmony. Volunteers rang the bell with pamphlets about curb appeal. Someone even left a swatch booklet on my porch highlighting more palatable neutrals with cheerful stickers. But they never directly ordered another repaint. They couldn't. Meanwhile, the once cheerful social gatherings around the neighborhood grew strained. Every block party felt like it existed under a cloud cast by my house's oppressive hue. Even though no one spoke openly about it, I could sense they were all waiting for the board to admit defeat. Then one afternoon a storm rolled in, not of weather but of paperwork. A new official notice appeared, this time attempting to reinterpret the definition of neutral. The board claimed some colors, while technically listed, could still violate community spirit. It was a desperate move, a flimsy one, and exactly the kind of overreach that would soon backfire spectacularly. The attempt to redefine neutral ignited a neighborhood uproar more intense than anything caused by the original yellow paint. The board's notice landed in mailboxes like a diplomatic threat, declaring that certain neutrals may unintentionally undermine visual cohesion and would henceforth require special approval. It didn't name my house directly, but the implication was as subtle as a brick-throw window. Residents reacted instantly and not favorably. The more rule-conscious neighbors panicked, unsure whether their own homes might suddenly fall into the category of aesthetically unacceptable neutrals. Others grew suspicious, questioning whether the board was targeting individual homeowners rather than maintaining fairness. Some even accused the HOA of overstepping their authority, arguing that changing definitions midstream violated the original charter. Suddenly, the board wasn't policing house colors anymore. They were fighting for legitimacy. Petitions appeared on street corners. Neighbors who had never spoken more than a polite hello began meeting in driveways, whispering about abuses of power and citing bylaws printed on hastily stapled packets. The drama pulsed through the community with the intensity of a reality show season finale. Meanwhile, my house continued being the accidental mascot of the rebellion. Caught between furious residents and the stubborn board, the neighborhood entered a period of bureaucratic chaos. The board attempted to hold clarification sessions, but these devolved into bickering over definitions of warm gray, cool beige, and whether visual harmony was even measurable. Residents challenged every clause, every vague phrase, every line of HOA jargon the board usually relied on to maintain control. By trying to punish me for following the rules too well, the board had accidentally motivated everyone else to start reading the rulebook carefully, something they had likely hoped would never happen. The tipping point arrived when a group of homeowners, tired of being told their houses might someday be too something, petitioned for a full audit of the HOA's color guidelines. This forced the board to release all past approvals and rejections, revealing a trail of inconsistencies, personal preferences, and decisions seemingly based on nothing more than which board member disliked which shade. The revelations blew up like fireworks. Residents who thought they had been rejected for rule violations realized they had simply run afoul of subjective tastes. Others discovered that some beloved board members had approved certain homes for color schemes suspiciously similar to their own. The veneer of order cracked, and beneath it lay the petty politics everyone suspected but couldn't prove. As the drama crescendoed, my house stood at the center like a monument to everything wrong with the system. During this turmoil, I continued to maintain the home exactly as required. Grass trimmed, trash bins stored, holiday decorations within the allotted sizes and timelines. The board could find no fault in anything I did. Their frustration grew visible: clenched jaws, stiff walks, whispered discussions during their drive-bys. Then the final blow landed. A neighborhood-wide vote passed with overwhelming support. The color palette would be restructured, approval processes standardized, appeal systems implemented, and most importantly, individual board members were barred from making subjective decisions disguised as rule enforcement. The board president resigned within weeks. 2 more members stepped down shortly thereafter. The remaining members had no choice but to acknowledge the chaos they had caused. And my house? It remained exactly the same. Once the board's influence weakened, residents began treating my home not as an eyesore, but as a symbol. The dreadful neutral became a badge of victory, a reminder that following the rules can sometimes expose how flawed the rules really are. People even grew fond of its tragic blandness, calling it the house that saved us from the beige regime. Months later, after enough time had passed and the new rules were firmly established, I finally decided to repaint, not because the HOA required it, but because the color had served its purpose. I chose a warm, welcoming shade again, still compliant, still within the guidelines, but undeniably alive. When the paint dried and the sun hit the siding once more, the house radiated a quiet triumph. It stood as proof that even the most rigid systems could crack under the weight of their own contradictions. The HOA would think twice before issuing another vague directive. And the neighborhood? It learned that sometimes the most powerful form of resistance is simply following the rules literally.